There's nothing like a quiet day to take a walk around your condominium, is there? Breathing in the fresh air, feeling the sun on your face, enjoying that little patch of green that I paid to exist. But, of course, I forgot that there's always an enlightened soul ready to turn a moment of peace into a spectacle of ignorance. That's how I met her. The woman who decided on her own that I didn't belong where I lived. Better still, where I was in charge. I was sitting on the bench near the court, fiddling with my cell phone, when I felt that look cross my existence. You know when someone analyzes you as if they were solving a puzzle? As if your presence in that space was an enigma that needed to be deciphered? She looked at me as if she was about to accuse me of a crime that even she wasn't sure existed. The problem with certain types of people is not even their lack of information, but their absolute conviction in their own ignorance. This woman was exactly that, a walking embodiment of misguided certainty. Without even giving me a second's peace, she approached with the posture of a mall security chief, but without the badge or the training. Her arms were crossed, her chin jutted out, and her gaze was a mixture of suspicion and pure disdain. "Do you live here?" The voice came with a tone that no longer asked, but only anticipated expulsion. I didn't look up from my cell phone. My mistake was thinking that ignoring it would make the creature invisible. "I asked you if you live here," she repeated, and now she had one of those tense smiles that people give before unloading a ridiculous speech. I took a deep breath. I wasn't wearing a suit. I wasn't carrying an executive briefcase. My sin? A comfortable sweatshirt, old sneakers, and an expression that clearly said, "I just want to be left alone." But, of course, to her, that meant only one thing. "Intruder. Because I've never seen you around here," she continued, as if the whole condominium was her private backyard and I was a delivery man who had lost his way. I looked around, as if expecting to see hidden cameras. Was this the moment when someone would shout, "Prank"? But no, it was just another episode in the series Random Citizens Thinking They're Sheriffs. "Do you have a problem?" I asked, still calm, because I knew the outcome of this story. I knew that her indignation was about to escalate to a level of theater that even Broadway wouldn't deliver. She snorted. "Yes," she snorted, the kind of huff that comes with a roll of the eyes and an impatience trained over years of being the most insufferable person in any environment. "This is a private space, you know. Only residents can use this area." Dramatic pause. "Which I am." The look on her face was priceless, as if I'd told her that I'm an astronaut and that I've just come back from Mars. But, unlike a normal person who would apologize and get on with life, she decided that this wasn't part of the script that was already written in her head. "I doubt it." I blinked. She doubted it? What exactly did she think I was doing there? Had I climbed the walls, parachuted onto the court, emerged from a time rift with the sole mission of sitting on that bench and disturbing her existence? But of course, she didn't stop there. The next step was logical, to call for reinforcements. "I'll call security," she said, with the confidence of someone who really thought she was protecting the community from a dangerous criminal whose greatest crime was to exist in the same space as her. And so, the scene became even more pathetic, because, within a few minutes, there was the condominium security guard arriving with the tired expression of someone who already knows he's going to have to deal with some unbelievable bullshit. The woman turned to him as if she were about to narrate an armed robbery. "This man is here, and says he lives in the condominium, but I've never seen him before. I don't think he belongs here. He doesn't belong here." If there was one thing I didn't expect when I left home that day, it was to be placed as an intruder on my own property. The question now was no longer about what I was going to say. It was about how long I could keep a straight face before bursting out laughing at the absurd scene unfolding in front of me. The poor security guard looked at me, looked at the woman, and in an instant understood exactly the level of trouble he had gotten himself into. Because, you see, he knew who I was. Unlike certain people who think they have the powers of a neighborhood sheriff, the security guard was used to seeing my face there, After all, I was technically the owner of that condominium. But instead of simply opening his mouth and ending the clowning right there, he hesitated. Perhaps because he'd dealt with this kind of person before, and knew that contradicting them would mean being trapped for hours in a monologue of fake indignation. Or maybe because he wanted to see how far it went before he had to intervene. I, on the other hand, was having fun. "Do you live here?" the security guard asked formally, trying to keep his composure. "Yes, I do." The woman snorted again, as if my answer was a personal affront to her existence. "He can say what he likes," she shot back, throwing her hands up in the air. "But everyone knows that we recognize our neighbors, and I've never seen that man around here." That's it. Now, as well as being a common pleas judge, she was also an expert in facial recognition? Wonderful. I could just end it there, taking out my cell phone and showing some emails, contracts, even the condo app that confirmed my ownership. But why kill the joke so quickly? "Are you the liquidator?" I asked, feigning curiosity. She widened her eyes, as if my question was a direct insult to her imaginary CV as defender of the condominium against invaders who own everything. "I'm not the manager, but I am a long-time resident," she retorted, with that artificial indignation that only a certain type of person can produce. "Oh, that's interesting. And how many years have you lived here?" She puffed out her chest. 3 years! 3 years! 3 years! And she really thought that gave her some kind of power over the neighborhood. "Wow," I muttered, trying to hold in my laughter. Meanwhile, the security guard cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. He knew that, sooner or later, he would have to tell the truth, but he also knew that this woman would hate every second of it. "Madam," he began, measuring his words, "that gentleman does live here." Pause. It took her brain 3 seconds to process the information. "What?" she almost screamed. The tone was a mixture of shock, denial, and sheer frustration. It felt like I'd just announced that the world was a lie and that everything she believed in was just a hoax. But that doesn't make sense," she insisted, gesturing as if trying to invoke arguments from beyond. "I've never seen him. Maybe because I don't patrol the common area looking for people to question whether they live here or not?" I suggested, winking innocently. She ignored it, because, of course, people like her are never wrong. They just adjust the narrative until it seems like they were right all along. "Still," she continued, with a glint of hope in her eye, "that doesn't explain why he's dressed like that. There you go." Now the clothes were the problem. "Sorry, I didn't know there was a dress code for sitting on a bench," I replied, raising my eyebrows. "Normally, the locals dress more appropriately," she retorted, in that fake voice of someone who wants to be polite but can't disguise her venom. "Of course, because everyone leaves home to walk in the park in a suit and tie, right?" The security guard snorted again, and I could see on his face a deep desire to get the hell out of there. But the best part was yet to come. "Besides," she tried one more card, "I heard that one of the owners of the condominium is a very influential man, and you look nothing like him." I swear, for a moment I thought I was going to faint from laughing so hard. "An influential man? And what does he look like?" I asked, genuinely curious. She hesitated, because, of course, I had no idea. She'd probably never seen anything other than rumors and assumptions she'd heard from other people, as clueless as she was. "All I know is that he must be someone important," she said with empty conviction. "Oh, you're right about that," I agreed, smiling. "He is very important indeed." She continued to stare at me, confused. And then came the final blow. "Because, in this case, it's me." Silence. The kind of silence that is so delicious it feels like the world is pausing dramatically, just to savor the moment. The woman blinked, as if I had just spoken in an alien language. "What's it like?" "Yes, I own the condominium." The security guard lowered his head, trying to hide his smile. She, on the other hand, looked like she'd been punched in the brain. The shock on her face was a masterpiece. For a few seconds, she opened and closed her mouth like a fish out of water. No words came out, No argument. Nothing. And I just smiled, waiting patiently to see what excuse she would come up with this time. Because if there's one thing I learned that day, it's that certain people never accept that they're wrong. They just look for a new way to embarrass themselves. If I had known that leaving the house to breathe fresh air would result in a free spectacle of someone writhing in shame, I would have brought some popcorn. Because, at that moment, I was watching, live and without commercials, the exact moment when a person realizes that they have done something so ridiculously wrong that there is no escape. The woman, who a few minutes ago spoke as if she were the official protector of the condominium, now sounded like a computer that had crashed after trying to run a program that was too heavy. "No, it can't be," she muttered, more to herself than to me, as if the universe itself had collapsed around her and needed to be restarted. "Ah, my dear, yes, it could be." "That's right," I continued, not hiding my amusement. "You were so worried about kicking me out of my own condominium that you forgot to check who's actually in charge here." The poor security guard was already looking like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. You could see that he was holding back a nervous laugh, hoping that it wouldn't get back to him somehow. The woman, on the other hand, was desperately trying to find a way out. I could see the circuits in her brain working on overdrive, trying to come up with an excuse that would free her from the colossal shame that was about to swallow her reputation whole. "Well, it's just," she began, hesitantly. "Ah, here it comes. It's just that you don't look like someone who manages such a condominium." I blinked, surprised at the audacity of doubling the bet. "And what exactly do you think a condominium owner should look like?" I asked, crossing my arms. She hesitated again, because, of course, I didn't have an answer for that. What she meant was obvious. To her, I didn't fit the stereotype of the person who should be in charge. I wasn't the middle-aged, gray-haired gentleman wearing an impeccable suit. I was just a normal guy, in sweatshirts and sneakers, who had the audacity to leave the house without first filling out the "looking rich enough to exist" form in front of her. But I wanted to hear it from her. I wanted to see how far this pathetic attempt to escape humiliation would go. "Look," she said, trying to put words together that wouldn't come out completely wrong. "I just meant that I imagined someone different." "Different how? An astronaut? A dragon? A president of the United States?" "I see," I mumbled. "You didn't know who I was, and preferred to assume I was an invader." She opened her mouth to deny it, but closed it again, because denying it would be an automatic admission that there was not a shred of logic in what she had done. "It was a misunderstanding," she finally said, trying to salvage what little dignity she had left. "A misunderstanding?" "It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a festival of ignorance mixed with a parade of random prejudices. But, okay, let's pretend this excuse sticks." "A misunderstanding?" I repeated, making sure to emphasize the words. She nodded quickly, as if she wanted to end the conversation as quickly as possible. "Yes, a silly misunderstanding." Of course. A silly misunderstanding that involved her calling security to kick me out of my own condo. Totally something that happens by accident, right? But I wasn't in a hurry. I wanted to savor this moment because situations like this don't come along every day. "Interesting," I continued, pretending to reflect. "Because, you see, if it was just a misunderstanding, you would have asked me nicely before calling the security guard." She winced slightly. "And if it really was a misunderstanding, you would have believed me when I said I lived here," I added, with a not-so-subtle smile. "It's just," she tried to say, but I cut her off. "And if it was just a misunderstanding, you wouldn't have insisted that I didn't look like a resident." Her silence was almost poetic. I could see her eyes searching for a way out, anything to escape the reality that she had just humiliated herself in a way that would hopefully be remembered by all the neighbors who were already starting to notice the scene. That magic moment when arrogance turns into pure desperation. "I think we can let it go, right?" she tried, forcing a smile that looked more like a cry for help. "Ah, my dear, Not so fast. So you mean it's just, let it go, when you're the one who makes a mistake? Her expression turned sour. That's the problem with people like her. They love to point the finger, shout out rules, complain about every little detail. But when it's their mistake, the rule changes completely. She realized she had no more arguments. And that's when the final straw came. The classic, how do I play the victim so I don't look like the wrong one? Moment. Well, you don't have to be so rude, she muttered, crossing her arms. The audacity. First, she tried to throw me out. Now, because I was simply pointing out the obvious, I was the rude one. Rude, I repeated, incredulous. You accused me of being a trespasser, called security, and now I'm the rude one. She blushed, but kept her pose, because, of course, accepting defeat wasn't in her plans. I was only trying to ensure the security of the condominium, she argued, as if that were sufficient justification for all the tomfoolery. Oh, right, because nothing says security like trying to evict one of the owners of the place. The poor security guard didn't know where to look. He probably just wanted to get out of there without having to deal with the aftermath of the horror show that this woman would try to put on. Well, since we're talking about security, I said, picking up my cell phone, I think it's a good idea to send an email to the condominium management. After all, we don't want this to happen to anyone else, do we? Her face paled. No need for that. Oh, now you don't. When it was to call security, it was fine. But now, when the story could turn against her, there's no need? I stared at her, waiting, and she knew there was no way out, but she still tried her last defense. It was a misunderstanding, okay? There's no need for drama. And that's when I knew. She wasn't going to admit she was wrong. Ever. The most she would do was play the poor thing, as if I was exaggerating, because that kind of person is never wrong. In their world, they are always the victims of a cruel system that simply doesn't understand their good intentions of being completely inconvenienced. I smiled. I'm glad you recognize that it was a misunderstanding, but I'm still going to send that email. Her desperation was visible, because, deep down, she knew. In that war of arrogance against reality, reality always wins. And this time, there was no escape. If there was one thing this woman wanted to avoid at all costs, it was for the story to spread. The problem was that she had chosen the worst possible person to try and put it over on. I wasn't one of those neighbors who simply gave a yellow smile and pretended that nothing had happened. I'm the kind of person who makes sure that every second of the prank she pulled comes back to haunt her for as long as it takes. So when I told her I'd send an email to the condo management reporting the whole scene, she panicked. Look, I really don't think we need to take this any further, she said, trying to regain her poise, but already with that tone of desperation that was impossible to hide. Oh, you don't have to now. Before it was a question of the condominium's security. Now that security has confirmed that I'm the owner, it's become something unimportant? I looked thoughtful, as if I were considering the proposal. You're right. We might not go through with it. The glimmer of hope in her eyes lasted half a second. As long as you go to the administration with me and apologize to me in front of everyone. Her silence was deafening. She stood there, blinking, processing the sentence, as if the very concept of apologizing was something alien to her brain. Her world probably revolved around always being right, always being right, always being the condominium vigilante against anyone who didn't fit her ridiculous vision of a good resident. Apologize? In public? It was too much for her. This is ridiculous, she exploded, her voice high and angry. You want to humiliate me on purpose. That's it. Now we were getting to the heart of the matter. It wasn't about safety. It never had been. It was about ego, about the simple fact that she thought she could walk around, pointing her finger and deciding who belonged and who didn't, and that she would never face any consequences for it. Now that the tide had turned, she hated being on the other side of the coin. Me? Humiliate you? I repeated, pretending to be surprised. Well, I'm just suggesting an apology for, what did you call it? Oh yes, The silly misunderstanding. She pressed her lips together so tightly that she seemed to swallow her words. I don't need to apologize, because I was trying to protect the community. Of course, because everyone knows that the first step to protecting a condominium is to try to evict the owner himself. The security guard was already exhausted. He looked at the scene with the look of someone who has given up on humanity and just wanted to go home and have a hot bath and forget that he had witnessed so much stupidity in such a short space of time. And then, like any desperate person who feels they have lost control of the situation, she resorted to the final card of shame. I could sue you for embarrassing me like that. What? Now I was convinced that the woman had no limits. She accused me, called security, insisted that I was a trespasser, and now she wanted to say that I was embarrassing her? I almost started laughing in her face. Are you going to sue me because you mistook me for a trespasser and humiliated me in the middle of the condominium I own? She crossed her arms, trying to hold on to her illusion of authority. I have rights, and I have a copy of the security camera footage showing everything that happened, I said, crossing my arms as well. What do you say we see who has the best chance in court? She froze, because, at that moment, she realized that she had lost. I saw in her eyes the exact second when the realization hit, that if I went through with this, she would be the one who would be embarrassed. If I wanted to, I could post this video in the condo group, send it to the other residents, maybe even upload it to the internet and turn it into a national case of people who don't know when to keep quiet. Her fear was palpable. It doesn't have to be like this, she muttered, now completely powerless. Oh, but it does, I continued mercilessly, because just as you thought you had the right to interrogate me and throw me out of my own space, I also have the right to make sure that never happens to anyone again. She didn't say anything else. She just stood there, staring at the floor, her shoulders tense, her fists clenched. That's when I realized that there was nothing left to take away from this situation. She was already defeated. There were no more arguments, no more excuses, more threats, and I'd had enough fun watching the woman who'd arrived full of arrogance sink into her own pride until there was no way out. Well, it was great to talk, I said, putting my hands in my pockets, but I still have that email to write. She let out a heavy sigh, as if she had just been defeated in an epic battle. But I knew it wouldn't end there, because people like that never learn. She wasn't going to leave there reflecting on how she should be less arrogant or more careful before judging others. She was probably going to spend the rest of the week trying to justify to herself what had happened. Maybe she would create a new narrative, where she wasn't wrong, just the victim of an unfair situation. Maybe she'd tell the neighbors that I was rude for no reason. But that didn't matter. The important thing was that, for the first time, she understood that not everyone was going to swallow her nonsense without fighting back. What about me? I went home, wrote my email, and made sure this story was recorded. Because if there's one thing I learned that day, it's that there will always be someone like her out there. And it will always be worth making sure that people like that think twice before trying to be the neighborhood sheriff again. And if you liked this video, don't forget to leave your like and comment below.